So we have a few, several options that you can do. With the ties and the braid, with the braid and the cinch tie and a loop instead of the strings. Or you can just have your strings hanging down. You can have just a bow plain by itself, such as this hat here. Or you can have a bow and a bead. Also let you know that doing a cinch tie and using the method of weaving in through stitches can be applied to any type of hat such as this that has stitches which are open enough where you can feed a braid, a yarn, a ribbon, or whatever it may be through. It could even be simply a double crochet if it's open enough, or a mesh stitch, or any other type of stitch. And if you were going to leave the tail, I would definitely seal the ends, and just make sure when you're doing your chain for your braid, take into thought whether you're going to have a bow, so enough length for the bow, and I would end it, and that's up to you, but I would end it just a little bit before the end of the hat. Okay, so that would be up here, and then you can have a bit of your tail hanging down. There's sometimes that I've seen ties on hats where they extend beyond the hat, and that looks cute too. But if that's having that in your hair and bouncing around, which could get tangled in the hair, and if that bugs you, then you might want to go with my recommendation of keeping everything to where it just comes to the end. So we'll do a couple of different versions, and let's go ahead and get started. I have the yellow, and even though it's not the same yellow, that's okay. And I think that this will work all right. Doesn't have to be exactly the same, but it's all kind of in the same family with these sunrise colors. And what I'm going to do is leave myself enough tail to work with at the end. Just make a slip knot, and I went ahead and I'm going to use the H 5.0 millimeter hook because it keeps the tightness of the stitch that I want without a loose chain and gaps, but it's still a pretty small hook for this yarn. It just helped it to have a little more flexibility and to keep it flat. Make a long chain, and you can always take some out at the end if it's too much before we cut it, so you won't be wasting it. Now that I've finished my chain, draw up a long loop so you don't lose that, because we're going to leave it open for now. You're going to work slowly with this. Take your time. I recommend this is where the big needle, yarn needle, will come in hand. So take your free end, the end that is not attached, where your loop is, and that's where we're going to use to feed through. It's much easier if you have it attached to a needle. Okay, and you can decide. I already wove in my ends, so you can go where the back portion is. Okay. And you can find that by where you did your, your slip stitch across. Go back and look for those. We have 6 double crochets. I ignored that center chain 1 space, and I just went and split it into 2s. So 1, 2 double crochet. I went through and then down and up the center 2. And I pull that through. So now that I'm on the up side, I need to go down. Now I'm going up the next 2 down over the next two, and up through the next two, which brings me back through the next center hole. And you're going to have to keep your yarn straight and kind of twist as you go. It's much easier to do that as you're progressing along. So what happens by starting down and up, you see how one shell you'll be going underneath the two center stitches, the other shell you'll be going over them, and that's how it'll be all the way around. They'll be alternating. Up, down, up, down, up, down. So this is a little bit thick. I mean, you're going to have to fiddle with this in order to keep that braid straight, but I personally don't think it's really that big of a deal. Keep them straight, keep them flat from twisting over. You just work that as you go. It will help if you start by feeding this length through and then leave enough at the end to decide if you're just going to use one bead to fit the two strands through, one from each side as a cinch tie, those together, or if you want to use this and create a bow and then just put a smaller bead, one on each end for decoration, which you can do. So that's what I'm going to do on this hat. And on the blue hat, where I fed it through a different way, that I'm just going to use one bead to cinch through, and I will show you on that one. Okay, so that should probably be enough to make a bow, but again, I can add more if I need to, and I can feed it back through from one end or the other, whichever might come up short. But this does take a little bit of time, so just going to be patient with it and yourself. And to me, it just adds a nice little something extra here and really makes the hat pop. So I do believe on this hat I'm going to keep this method. All right, so I've come up through this big center space. Wherever you come up, the next you will go down, and whenever you go down, the next you will come up. So in between, there's 1, 2 double crochet, go in between there, down, and then up through the next 2 double crochet, and feed that yarn through. Make sure my stitch is straight, and don't tug on it. You want it to be not loose and gaping, but with same size to the hat, because if you cinch it tight now and then you make the length of your cord with it cinched, it's not going to be the right size when you want it to be. Does that make sense? You don't want this cinched tight as you're feeding it through. That's something you do after it's all done and put together. If you need to cinch it for yourself or a person that you might be making it for, then they can cinch it, and they're going to have the room to do that without having too much or too little to work with. All right, so now I'm up. I'm going to go down, then up through the first, after the first 2, and then over the next 2, and then back up through the last 2. You don't have to just do like one section at a time. I would not do any more than that. I wouldn't do a whole bunch like you might a running stitch, because it's just easier to feed this little bit at a time. Make sure it's flat, not twisted, and then go on to your next section. Helps if you straighten out your cord from the beginning, but it can wind up twisting anyway. So I'm up on the upside. Now I'm going to go down and up. You see how every other, you're going underneath these 2 double crochets so those pop up. The next one, they're a little bit recessed. And to me that just adds a little fun, a little bit of interest to the hat. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and finish weaving mine through, and I'm going to meet you just before the end, show you what I'm going to do. So these 2 will meet in the middle because I didn't want my center to be coming through this big space, because the bead it just wants to work its way back. This way you don't have to worry about it. It's secured, self-secured here. Okay, so I will see you back around. All right, so back to the fun stuff here. All right, I have come around, and this is where I began and what I want to do from here. I've come up. Now I'm going to go, see where on the left side this came up? I'm going to go down into this space, 1, 2 stitches over, and I'm going to bypass this piece and come out the other side of the center too. And whether you do it on top or underneath doesn't matter. I mean, one's going to be on top or underneath the other. Just whatever that you feel that looks the nicest, the cleanest, the smoothest. And make sure your chain is not twisted in any way, which mine is here. So you have it self-secured. There you have it. Okay. So I give it just a little bit of a tug. You can try it on your head as well, but just to make sure that it's not going to be tight on. Now you can test your length. Mine aren't even yet. That's all right. You can choose to put a knot in it if you want, but I think for the thickness of this yarn, doesn't need it to make a bow. I can just make a bow, but I might have to do the loop around backwards so that it is straight, not a bow that wants to twist around and turn. However you want to do it is up to you. Okay, so this is just about perfect. Wow, I don't think I could have planned that any better. So I am going to cut this end. Make a knot. Secure that end. So on this one, my bow is going to be my cinch, and I'm going to put one of these little metal beads on each end. These feed through pretty easily. Just going to slip it up just a little bit. Now you can slip this up higher if you want. Depends on how you want to make your knot. I'm just going to get it out of the way for now. Make a knot right at the base of my chain, and you might have to do a few. And before you cinch it tight, make sure it's up there. You don't want that to slide off. So I went around from left to right. Now I'm going to go right to left, and it's a way of kind of making a square knot in a way on just one strand of yarn. And what that will do for you is keep your knot centered. Now I'm going to go back the other way, and I'm going to go over top from where my end of my braid is to the bottom of the knot and try to fit that right smack in the center. You can knot this however you want to. You know, if it's not working out, if it doesn't look good, that's why I just play around with it. I don't want to fiddle with it too much and mess up my yarn, and I want it to look good, which that presently does not, but when you bring your bead back down, it's going to look a little better. And then I'm going to go back the other way one more time. Get that knot, this last knot over top of my knot. Cinch that down. Slide my bead down. And you have to have something to hold it. I don't mind that. You can have either a couple things you can do is you can have the tail hanging a little bit if you want, or get kind of tricky here. If you don't mind a little more fiddling, and you can weave the end in by going through, oh, probably this loop here that's poking out. It's going to help cinch that down a little bit, and just keep weaving it in till you think it looks good. And make sure this yarn, it's easy to poke through the strands, so you have to be sure you're actually going through that whole loop and not splitting the strands of it. Then I'm going to just go up my braid a little bit, and I'm going to keep working it up, hiding it in here, blending it in so it's just and even on the back, through the back bumps. Do that until you're satisfied that this is secured. And then I slide my bead back down. I think that looks pretty good. Except I'd like to fit this one in somewhere just so that yarn looks a little bit more smooth down here at the end. You know, if this is too much for you to deal with, you don't have to. You don't have to do any of that. I'm just showing you some of the little things that I do just to create. See, now I went down and back up, and now that made a pretty smooth little ball on the end. Slide my bead back down. Careful not to stretch your yarn out. If you have other techniques, something else on YouTube you think works better than that, I'd love to see it. That's all there is to that. Now for the other one, I fed it through a little bit differently, and this was super easy. All I did here was go right through the center, that chain one space, down through the center, up through the big hole, my yarn needle. I still want to make sure it's straight, only because it makes it easier for me as I work through. Okay, so I've come up, so now I'm going to go down through that chain one space, up through the center hole. And this one goes real quick and easy. You know, it's just not much fiddling or anything. The biggest deal is making sure that your chain is straight as you come through. Okay, So down, up, down, up. That's all there is to that. And just straighten out your cord, chain, ribbon as you go. Okay? Not that big of a deal. And here we are. Down and up. And now, what to do? I am actually going to take this bead off, and I'm going to go through, let's see, how do I want to do this? I'm going to do what I did with the other. So I have a center space here, because I can go, so I came up on the right side, so now I'm going to go down after the first two, double, go down, and then come up. I'm going to pull this out. Got the center. So here are the center 2 double crochets, ignoring that chain 1 space on this one. Okay. And on the other, I will do the same. I will go down, so I want to keep this pattern. So I'm going to go across the 3, and then I'm going to come up the other side of the center 2 and bypass this one. Okay. And I'm going to go underneath, because that's going to secure that even more. Give it a little boop boop tug. So look at that, and those came out even. You know, you do it enough times, you can just kind of get an eyeball. What I do is I make my long chain, I spread it out here on the table, put the hat over top, go around, and then I know I'm going to need extra, just loosely go around, because you're weaving in and out, that takes up space. And then I know I'm going to want some length to go up to or a little bit past the brim, depending on the look. So then I just chain a little more. Sometimes I have to add, sometimes I have to take it out. So what I'm going to do for this one, before I decide on my length here, I'm going to use 1 large hole bead. And first I want to make sure, now this is real straight, and again another fiddly part, but this is a good large hole one. I'm going to feed my bead through, slide it up. Really doesn't matter which side you do first. I'm going to take my smaller needle, because it's going to fit through that hole with the yarn. Yes, so try to keep your yarn, your cord straight and in the direction, so the front is facing up when you feed it through, so you will have less twisting to deal with. And again, keep this facing the correct direction. I'm going to fold back one side, fold the other, and I'm going to pinch them tight, just to get a little bit of space in there. And I want to be sure not to catch my needle. So I'm keeping it again in the correct direction, sliding that needle through. I have to wiggle it. A little tricky there. Okay, once you get it through, now you can just pull the tail end so you have less bulk to deal with. Take your needle off, and now We'll just slide that piece through. And you see, by taking a minute to be sure they are in the same direction to start with, you don't have to try and twist your strands while they're in here and figure out which direction they're going, and it's putting tension and stress on your cord. So by just taking that extra minute at the beginning saves you a lot at the end. And keep a tight grip as you work it up and work the bead up, and move your fingers and pinch this as you go. Okay, and you can leave that little bit loose, because I think that creates a nice look if you want to. And you could tie it off here if you just want the bead without a bow. You can have a nice little tie, do a little square knot, cinch that real good, square knot, and then I would just leave the tails at the end. I think that would look fine. You could go even a little bit higher. Just leave enough room so if someone's wearing it, they can just reach around the back of their head without taking it off. You know, they can grab the yarn at the base, and they have enough room to where to put their fingers so they can feel what they're doing. To then they can just take that bead and cinch it up and tighten it if they want to. What they'd have to do is you take each end, because we bypass a little bit, and you just gently pull. You see how easily that tightens it up? Gently pulls, you pinch the bead, and you push the bead to the top. You can do it that way. Now that's a little tight. Ideally it's a little bit too tight, because it's going to create a little bit of friction over time, but I think that this yarn is going to flatten out. If you can have the pieces to where they're together back to back instead of side to side, that's less bulk right there. You know, and then this yarn squishes down, you know, pretty flat. So you can do it that way. I think that looked pretty cute. Or if you want to cinch it up to the top, but then again keeping this open and free, you can still have a little bow on it if you want. I think that looks cute too. Well, I decided this large hole bead is not large enough for the thickness of this yarn. Be fine for the cording. Even the 4mm cord, the 3 or the 4, it'll be fine for that. It would be fine for the same yarn going through it. But I was just concerned it's too tight. It might be frustrating for the wearer, and also it's going to cause friction. So I took that bead off. I'll use it for something else. It's a very nice little bead. And I took the 2 brass toned metal beads that I had in that little packet, put them on here because I thought that worked back real nicely with these kind of mushroom stone type colors. And like when you have your needle, always make sure that the eye portion, the head portion, is going to fit through your bead. So test that out first. So I slid my bead through, and I simply tied a knot. Simply tied a knot and cinched it down really, really tight. And again, depending on the thickness of your yarn and how it holds with a single knot, and if that knot is thick enough to keep your bead from falling off, and really double, triple check it, because sometimes it seems like it's going to be okay, and then it'll wind up, if you pull enough on it, that knot's going to just pop right through that hole. Okay, so that's pretty easy, pretty self-explanatory what I did for this. I'm just going to show you what I did for this hat. This is a larger hole. This is a really nice large hole, and it works great with this Bernat Maker Home for simply a sliding cinch tie. And I'm going to show you right here exactly what I mean by just giving it a little cinch, and then it pulls it in. But I wouldn't hold your hand way down below and cinch. I would secure it more a little towards the base of the bead so as not to stretch out your yarn. Okay. Alright, so what I did to create the loop, here we'll leave this out for a little visual comparison. Okay, so my loop from my working end where I cut my yarn attached to the skein, and then here's my tail end. So good, I want to make sure my braid is facing up on both sides. So in order to keep it up, I'm going to have to turn a little bit. Now where you see the back bumps, I take my tail end, I feed it through my loop on the hook, bring that in, and then cinch my slip knot down right at the base of the knot on my tail end. Okay, these ends were not even, so we have to just pretend that we are, and pretend there's a bead right up here. And when you feed your two ends through the bead, I think I might have said this in the second segment, but it's okay, I'm going to say it again. Try to, before you feed it through, put your outside back to back, because this yarn does squish down. It's going to be easier to fit it through with them back to back. It's a little more thickness but less width than side to side. Okay, but just make sure both ends are facing up. Okay, so you've tied this off. And then that's where I'm either going to do a square knot. I think I might have done a surgeon's knot on that. Again, just to refresh your memory, is left over right, go under like tying a shoe, and then take that same yarn end, that you just wrapped around, and then go around and under one more time. And then you want to pull that nice and tight. So you can see which looks better, that method or a square knot. I'm not going to cinch that real tight. I think I might have done the square knot, left over right, right over left. Alright, and then with my ends, I did very similar in this method of weaving in my ends so you cannot see them, and I just took my end around the back, and I went through the back bumps in one way, next bump the other, back and forth. Did that a few times going up, and then I went back through maybe one of the side stitches, kind of through the opposite way again. Find a place where I can make a nice tight little knot that isn't going to be visible, and then I continue kind of down to where I think it's going to look good. And as you come down, if you have an area where there's a little gap, you can just take that yarn, make a little jump from, say if your yarn comes out here, down into the next spot to fill in that space. And then make sure it's nice and secure, and wherever I cut that off, that's where I take a dab of this crafter's pick and I seal the end of that piece so it didn't end, because this yarn has a bit of slip to it. I don't want it to slip and work its way out. So you can take your fingernail, even a yarn needle for that matter, because you can wash it off afterwards. But if you don't want to get glue on that, again, a toothpick works. Just make sure they're strong and not going to break off and splinter. And that reminds me, back to the paper towel thing. Use paper towel that's not going to leave lint and fuzz on the top of your cap of your glue, because that'll just wind up transferring, you know, if it's stuck on there, to possibly your next project or clogging the tip. Okay, so after I've just take a little glue and just say this is where I've cut it off, and I just apply it, dab, 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 just a little bit where you can't even see it. And I'll take either my fingernail or that toothpick, and I'll just kind of smush it down and poke that in there real good. I'll do one layer and then I might do another. Few very thin layers will do the job. The braid that I originally did, I kind of ruined that. And with all that length that I had on my ends, I wound up cutting them too short after doing all my knots, and that portion of it didn't look good. The bead didn't really fit right. Took that out. Tried this yarn, the same type as the purple. You know, if you can look online, maybe Love Crafts, which is same as Love Crochet, you know, Love Knitting, see if they have a type of tape yarn, but be sure that it's not too thick and too bulky and dense and heavy. Now this one is a bulky, you know, super bulky, but it's very soft and it smushes down flat and it's real pliable. So read the materials, kind of the reviews, that kind of thing. So I pulled one of two left, of pretty good size, the large hole beads that I have. It is similar to this one in the diameter of the opening, just a little, ever so slightly smaller. And it was tricky. I got it in there, wasn't really easy, but I used a yarn needle, a smaller one, not a tiny, but the one I've been working with, that smaller one. I worked it in and it slides up real nicely. So with this one, you don't need to have a gap between the base of your last round and from where you have your bow, as with some where you will need to grab the two ends and pull them apart in order to do the cinch. And in that case, you're going to need to have that space between your bow and the top and where your bow is. But because there's still enough slip up and down with the bead, this one you can just simply pull it and cinch tie it, and you can cinch tie it as much or as little as you want. You want to open it up, you just slide it back down. So that works pretty well. And because of the slip of the yarn too, it has just the right amount. So I'm going to leave a little tiny bit of space, but this one I'm going to, once I cut the ends, and I'm going to use my own suggestion and just cut a little bit at a time. Doesn't take much to make a difference. You know, the color tone goes with this taupey color a bit, and someone will like it, right? And then I'm probably going to do a braid. I don't know, I really like this ribbon in here though, so I don't know. I'm going to figure this one out. I also have some mercerized cotton in white in the Sinfonia yarn which Hobby Lobby used to carry, and it appears they're phasing out of it, but it's not an exclusive to them. And I was going to combine that with the Lion brand 24/7. The Symphony is a sport weight. The Lion brand, it's classified as a 4, but I think it's more of a worsted 3. That's what it feels like to me. The two of these would work pretty well, and by doing a chain braid, and then when I tie it off at the end, which is really nice about these mercerized, is that the ends stay pretty neat, pretty tidy, and they make great fringe. So when combining the two together, you know, that could almost be like a little fringe-like effect. So I'm going to give that a try and see what I can work up, and I'll be back in a flash. Hey, well, that came out pretty cute. I might even like that a little bit better. That wide ribbon, I think that'll be great for a different type of hat where the band has a little bit larger stitches and more spacing, and that could be just a standalone with the bow if the coloration has enough going on its own, and then that white ribbon just be a little, you know, pop of color. Oh, I do like that. This was a little bit tricky because of the two yarns together, feeding it through. It tended to want to twist a little bit more, but it wasn't like terribly bad. I just needed to take a little bit more time with it. And oh, another thing, like I wanted, the reason with the mercerized cotton why it holds its shape so well and doesn't tend to fray as much as it's got this wonderful chainette construction to it. Doesn't have much stretch to it, but a lot of strength and resiliency, and I love the mercerized for certain projects, hats, bags, things of that nature. All right, so let's get to feeding let's see what happens if I can get my bead on. You know, I think with this one, I'm going to skip the bow. I think it's just a little overkill. I don't want it to be too cutesy in a childlike way, because for an adult who likes pink, it's a grown-up looking hat as well with the braid. I think that takes it to another level. I don't know how much extra I need. Hopefully that ought to do it. I'm going to just go ahead and tie that off. And, oh, another thing I want to tell you, if I didn't already, the side where you're coming across and then down and going all the way over and bypassing all these 4 stitches and going in between, like after the middle 2. Go underneath, bring it through underneath the other yarn. It's going to secure that a little bit more, whereas see on the opposite side you've gone down and up and through the center more. You're not bypassing, you're only bypassing 2 stitches on this side. On this side it's 4, the first 2, and then the middle 2, and through again the placement where you went under with the other side of the yarn. Yeah, if your ends are uneven before you feed it through, just snip them a little bit. It's going to be a lot easier with my needle. Okay. Getting late. We have the internet technician coming tomorrow. I want to be able to get this done and use my computer before the lines are being worked on. Okay, so I'm going to pull the ends through. There we go. And twist if I need to so that the braid is facing upright and comes through the other side. So, oh Lucy, sides look nice and pretty. You can, you know, fiddle with it if you want to. Just kind of work it a little bit till it's turned in the direction. There we go, almost. And always make sure before you finish it up that it's pulled out enough and that your loops at the top are even. Alright, before I got too far, I wanted to show you what I decided to do on this one, because I like the color so much. I thought they'd make a cute little sort of a tassel in a way, a little bit of fringe at the end. So ignore this strand for a moment. So I took out my braid back to the base of the button. I tied one side, cinched that slip knot, tighten it up good, and the other side, tighten it up good. Alright, and then I took the two ends here that I've cut and I made a little square knot, and then that left just a little center, very, very small little bit of a donut hole, if you will. And I took another piece of yarn. Now that this is a separate piece of yarn, I threaded it through the needle and I poked it through the hole, brought it through the two ends. And I'm going to shorten that a little bit because I don't need that much. So let's see how this works out. I'm going to make another knot. In fact, I think I'm going to do it in the back so it's not as visible, hopefully. First I'm going to start with the leftover right and see how that looks. Alright, looking alright. Right over left. Cinch that down nice and tight. Give it another little trim. See? I mean, it's kind of coming together a little bit. We'll see. I'm going to do that, repeat that process. So I'm using up the ends that I cut because I had excess. Okay, went through the hole, pulled it through. Hope my wrist was out in the way. I hope, I don't know, I can't tell from here. I hope you could see that. Take my yarn needle off again. And I don't want it to twist to one side in a weird way. And I don't really mind the look of that knot. Let's see, and I don't want it so much bulk on the back where it's going to make it lopsided, kind of the weight more heavy on one side to where it's going to want to twist that. So I think I'm going to go ahead and do one knot on the front. So that was left to right. Now I'll go right to left. I like the look of that. I think that's okay. Cinch it down. Bring all those strands together. Cut the ends. And you can kind of just squish. So what I do is I squish my knots a little bit together so they'll be more centered. And you know, I could probably put another little layer on there if I wanted to. So you can give it a little comb out, okay, and then just trim however you like. Remember, you can always cut more, but you can't put it back. And you can just make yourself nuts trying to get these exactly even. By the time you're done, you'll have a little bit of squatty length if you're lucky. That looks pretty good. I might play around with that a little bit more. Perhaps add on one more here in the center. I think that'll look good. Alright, well, I'm going to do that, and no, that's probably not long enough. Okay, and then I'll be back in a second to show you the finished piece. Well, here we go. How about that? I am so pleased. What I did was I added 2 more pieces. Once, you know, I took my double strand, and these 2 times when I fed it through the center, instead of tying it around the back and then the front, I tied it vertically. So I came through here, and then I separated the middle sections, okay, and then, okay, so my yarn is coming through this way, right, and I tied it. It's coming through this end and through, and this is on the back. It's coming through the center hole, and I tied it this way. Ugh, can you see over my arm? Okay, just to show you. Pretend that's through the center. Alright, vertically up and down. Did my square knot, and I did that twice. And to me, this created an interesting effect with the, there we go, you can see, with the double strands and this type of yarn. Create a little interesting texture effect with the knots. And by going up and down, it kind of filled in that center space a little bit. This tassel here portion is a little bit curly, so I'm going to just wet those down and let them lay flat to dry to smooth them out, because that'll really give a nice effect. I like the tassels straight and even and smooth, so you know they'll have a nice flow to them instead of just a couple on the end sticking up. And that's just from being wound on the skein. I hope you can hear me. I accidentally set my scissors down on the microphone. Probably not the best thing for it. Hopefully you could hear me through that. Okay, well, I think that's pretty cute. That's a neat way of having a little tassel without going through the whole process of attaching a tassel. And this is my modified, there I am in screen. This is my modified, I don't want to really call it a shortcut version. It's just another way of doing it to make it fit the construction of the hat and be all in one piece coming off the bead, so to speak, you know, without trying to attach a separate tassel. And it really does look like it's just all one piece. Hear my dog drinking water. But this is it for now for this episode. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and ways that you can weave. We put in a cinch tie, the different types of hats that you can use it for, along with all the different materials I've showed you, and ways of tying it on. Oh, I'm so happy with how this one turned out. And as Bob Ross, the painter, says, this is what you call a happy accident. And sometimes what you think is a mistake doesn't have to be discarded altogether. You just have to rework it and go about it in a different way and think outside of the box. Don't get stressed out over it. Just enjoy the process. If you have to, set it aside for a minute. Let it rest. Let your mind rest. Come back to it maybe in the light of a new day, and you'll be surprised. You look at something in a different way, and all of a sudden you know just what to do. And have fun. Thanks again as always for being here. Take care everybody, and I will see you soon.